Okay, do you see it? It says it's going. Okay, so
Yep.
this is the Saturday morning call for me in Thailand. What time is it for you in New Zealand?
It's just 3:10 in the afternoon.
Uh-huh. Okay, so you're ahead of us then. You're one of the few places on Earth that's ahead of us. Everybody else is behind New Zealand. I didn't know whether it was on which side of the international date line it is. So uh, on New Year's Day, it's New Year's Day in New Zealand before it is almost anywhere else.
Yeah, it is.
Corey, where are you located?
I'm in the Pacific Northwest of United States, so like in the Washington area, Washington State.
Did you know that there's a lot of good Watts in Washington around Seattle? How far from Seattle are you?
Maybe like 2 or 3 hours.
Oh,
2 hours on a good day and 3 hours on a bad day.
So you're over in the eastern part of the state?
Like down south, like 2 hours south of Seattle. So still on the
coast,
west side of the mountains. Yeah. Yeah, I wouldn't mind going and visiting. It's been on my to-do list to visit one or two of the Watts or some of the Watts, and I just haven't gotten around to doing it, but I plan to someday. So,
Wat Dhammarato is highly recommended. Ajahn Reed is the abbot there, and they have a huge collection of Bhikkhu Buddhadasa books that they're willing to give away. In fact, they'll hand it right to you. So, talking about going to the Watts, many people will have an experience. There's various ways or periods of time. You can go for a couple of hours, you can go for a day, you can go for a few days, you can go for months at a time.
What was it called? Because there was like, I got to try and search it. What was the name of that?
Dhammarato.
Okay, so A-T-A-M.
A-T-A-M. M-A-R-A or M-A-Y-A, depends upon how you spell Myra.
Dhammarato.
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, it's in Cottage Lake. Okay, it's in Woodinville, Washington. Let me just see how quick, what the directions are. It's only 2 hours. I mean, that's not bad. I have a sister up there too. So I'll go visit my sister and stop by. Maybe I'll go up and visit her for on a Friday and then check out the Wat, spend the weekend or, and then maybe I'll come visit my sister again, because she's just got a tiny apartment. So that's cool. I got the location, I got the mission mapped out. So I'll try and go see them. Is it better to go see them in the summer or any time of the year is okay?
Any time of the year is okay, but the best time of the week to go is either Sunday or Saturday at about 10 o'clock in the morning. And the reason that that's true is because that's the most busy time. That's the time when the lay people, the Thai people, will go to the Wat. And so more activities, things like that. And that it's generally also time for lunch. That's why they would go, is they would go. And so there's, for sure, that's the time to meet all the important people at the Wat, which would be all of the monks and especially the abbot, Ajahn Reed, is actually quite a famous student of Bhikkhu Buddhadasa. And the other part is that the lay people will show up, and an interesting way of looking at it is that the monks all consider themselves guests of the Wat. even though the abbot is the abbot or the head monk of the monks and that kind of thing, all of the decisions are made by the lay people, and generally, because Thailand is a matriarchal society, it's the elderly women. And so anytime that a Westerner goes to a Thai Wat, I highly recommend that they seek out the bossy kind of women. You can tell who's in charge and who's not, and go make friends with them.
I had first-hand experience with that, Dhammarato.
Oh, really? Tell me about it.
My local Wat is basically like a miniature Thailand. All the people there, they're all Thai monks. All the lay supporters are mostly Thai, and especially the woman who are the head in charge. She's an older Thai lady. So, yeah, I saw that firsthand.
Mm-hmm. So, today that we're going to talk about the Wats and the fact that we'll say relatively speaking, that a person growing up in a society like the New Zealand society or the Aussie society, British society, American societies, all have a kind of clock built in the sense that you got to get up, you got to go to work, you got to go do this, you got to go do that. Everything is on a schedule and stuff like this, to where the things that are scheduled at a Wat are far less frequent. That when I was in the United States, living in the Wats in North Carolina, there was a lot of, let us say, interactions between the various groups and religions. For one thing, we had a Catholic monastery that was just a few miles from the Wat in Greensboro. And so people would go there, and then they would come to visit the Wat. And the Wat life does not have many activities planned. And so they would come from the Catholic monastery, where everything is regimented. People got to get up at the same time. They go do this at the same time. They go to the workshop at the same time. They pray at the same time. They lunch at the same time, etc., like that. And so it's all on a great big schedule. And so they would come and they would ask me, what is your schedule? What do you do? And my answer generally in a humorous way was, well, I do lunch. That even those Wats that have a kind of a busy schedule, it would normally be around chanting times. And that in Theravada Buddhism, chanting has historically been an important aspect of Wat life. And that there's a good value for that. But the value has diminished because of the circumstances. For one thing, when the chanting was done in the native language, you see, Theravada is very traditional. And since they had always done the chanting in Pali when it was a native language, they continued to chant in Pali when it's a foreign language. And that foreign language quality to it has a kind of mystical or magical kind of thing. Like, for instance, up until the 1960s, they all of the priests did what chanting that they did in Latin. And nobody in the audience understood, and so they thought that it was kind of magical. The same thing is still true about the Thai Wats, is that they chant in Pali. And by the way, the chanting got started long before there was enough books to go around and most people didn't read anyway. And so the mind training was to learn the chants, just like a musician nowadays would learn one song after another and build up a repertoire. This is exactly what would happen in the monasteries, that over time I built up a repertoire, but the stuff that we chanted the most often would be the ones that I would remember most easily. So that chanting quality, a lot of Westerners don't like it because they don't see what enormous value that it has. And one of the things that it has as a value is that while you're doing the chanting and paying attention, even if you're trying to follow out of a book to keep up with what the monks are chanting, or you're listening and trying to follow along, by doing so, that empties the mind of all of the other stuff. And we're focusing and paying attention on the chanting as well as the meaning of the chants. Now, in the very early times of the Buddha, the monks started to chant what the Buddha would teach. They would memorize it and then go over it and over it and over again. And then a new monk would come in and he would learn the chant before he learned the meaning of it. And this is why so much of it is in, let us kind of say, shorthand, in the sense of the Paticcasamuppada, for instance. Very rarely, when it's teaching Paticcasamuppada as a group, very rarely does it ever go into great detail about any individual one. And so they would learn all of that stuff in the chanting, and then later they would go off with their teacher, and their teacher would explain what everything meant. But that didn't make it into the suttas. That what made it into the suttas was the things that were being chanted. And so this was the educational system. What we would have today is that people would read books and still not know what it means. But they would figure it out for themselves, and often they would figure according to what they know rather than according to what's there. And so this is one of the big problems with Theravada, or actually we call it Western Buddhism, is that people kind of have to figure it out for themselves rather than having a good teacher who can explain what it means. But the disadvantage that I have is that I have to teach what's in the chants and then explain it, as opposed to having the students been in the chanting sessions enough to where they know what it is in chanting wise. Now, I was actually very lucky in two regards. One is that when I was at Wat Suan Mok, Bhikkhu Buddhadasa didn't care much for the chants. He never went to the chants. Achan Po would go, but he would stand in the back. He was there for, let us say, keeping track of who's doing it. But that most of the people who were doing the chanting at Wat Suan Mok were visiting monks who would chant at their own place, and so naturally they would come to Wat Suan Mok. They would continue to doing their chanting, but very few of the residents at Wat Suan Mok would actually go to the chants. But when I got to the United States, I happened to have found a really, really good abbot teacher. We made good friends. His name was Mahasamsak. I talk about him sometimes. And he had a very special connection with a very, very, let us say, world-renowned, one of the best guys in the world, was his teacher in chanting at Wat Po in Bangkok. And that his teacher was the guy, there was a World Council in 1954, and his teacher was there to give a demonstration. It took him about 3 months to go all the way through it, an hour or two a day, and everyone in the audience would have their books out to follow along, just to hear all of this. And he chanted the entire Tripitaka in the course of 3 months. Meanwhile, in another hall, a Burmese monk did exactly the same thing. And so all the people who would go to his chanting sessions would be following along in their Burmese script of the Pali. So it was a really, really big deal. And it's impressive to know that some monks can memorize that entire library. The Pali chant of the Pali canon takes up an enormous bookshelf, and so it's a huge amount of literature. And someone would say, well, why so much literature? The answer to that is these are all just a lot of it is stories. A lot of it is, but it's all Dhamma. That in fact, you could say that the actual teachings of the Buddha is very, very small. But all that has been said about the teachings of the Buddha is vast. Okay, so the fact is that Bhikkhu Buddhadasa and Mahasamsak's teacher knew each other, made that kind of a special connection between myself and Mahasamsak, because our teachers knew each other. And so that kind of obligated me then to get involved with the chanting, because Mahasamsak, he was really into chanting. One of the things that I remember a lot is that if I passed by his room, when he was in his room, day or night, late at night, you could hear him chanting. He would be in there going over to. That's what he did. He in his private time, that you could say his meditation was the chanting. Now, there's a really good advantage for that. If you have your mind on the Dhamma, that's part of the practice. In fact, in Sutra number 10 in the Majjhima Nikaya, this is the Satipatthana Sutta, it talks about what can one have in their mind, what is worth looking at in the mind. And in the beginning of that part of the sutta, it talks about the hindrances. But once we remove the hindrances for the mind, what's the mind going to do? The answer is we're going to do the Dhamma. That keeping our mind and eye on the Dhamma is the very best thing that we can do with our time, is to think about the Dhamma, mulling it over, or in Mahasamsak's case, he's actually chanting suttas, going over it. He was also always very popular because he knew all of the chanting for funerals and for ordinations and all of that kind of stuff. And so he was in great demand. But here's the point that we're starting to make about this, is that at the Wat, there's not very much to do. And a good monk will then spend his time with the Dhamma. Me, I was reading books a lot, in the sense of taking the Visuddhimagga and the Majjhima Nikaya and comparing them back and forth to getting the insights. That's when I really began to understand how right Bhikkhu Buddhadasa was about the Visuddhimagga, was right almost up until the last minute. It's like giving somebody directions to go all the way across the country. You go to this city, you go down this street, and then instead of turning left, he turns right. And then you get lost. You're already very, very close there, but then the Visuddhimagga would make a twist to mislead. And so what happens then is if we are having our mind on the Dhamma and keeping focused on the Dhamma, then everybody's kind of in it for himself, and everybody goes off to their kuti without much of a schedule. And new Westerners who would go to the Wat, they feel kind of lost because they're looking for activities. That we're looking, actually, many reasons for people going to the temple is for entertainment. And that's what happens with most of the Wats in the United States, is that they expect that the Westerners come as a tourist. They're not really there for the Dhamma. They're there for the culture. They're there for the food. They're there for all of the statuettes and all of this kind of stuff as a tourist. But there's some important things, Corey, that you can do, both of you, in fact, is when you go to the Wat, if you're dressed correctly, if you dress in white, then they'll know that you're there for the Dhamma. If you dress like an ordinary Westerner, they will assume that you're there for being a tourist, and then the abbot's not going to pay much attention to you. But if you're there in white, then that's a kind of, first impression kind of thing, because people go to the Wat in white in a kind of a ceremonial kind of way. That in fact, on weekends at Wat Suan Mook many years ago, they would bring bus loads of students from the various universities, primarily Thammasat University in Bangkok, by the bus loads, and all of the people who got off of the bus were already dressed in white. They didn't dress in street clothes and then change into white. That I would watch them get off the bus already in the white. So as we go into the Wat, we bring all of our baggage with us. And one of the things that we can do is when we dress in white, that gives us a mental state that we're going into something that's different than the outside world.
That's what I had to do, Dhammarato. Before I went, I was asked to wear white, and I wore white the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
And when I got back into normal clothes, it felt strange.
Yeah, the white that they wear here in Thailand is very loose-fitting, very, very comfortable. The pants are thin. One student asked me about wearing jeans, and I says, well, white jeans are kind of unusual. There are people, they do sell white jeans, but white jeans have very heavy cloth, buttons, pockets, sewing, belt loops, all of that kind of busy stuff on white jeans. But the white pants that they wear in Thailand, and probably that you wore at the Wat, is very loose-fitting, easy-going, can sit easy. I can imagine that someone who sat down in white jeans would be uncomfortable in those white jeans. To wear the white pants would be, that they wear at the Wat, would be nice. So when we go to the Wat, everything is different. It's like in the normal living style that everybody has in the mundane world, it's almost like we've got to go do this, we've got to go do that, I've got to go work. Tam's in the situation of she's got to build this house. And that I have actually fallen into that a little bit, in the sense, we've got to get this website. But when I think about that, I recognize, no, I don't, let me think about it. Let me be very careful and very clear about it, and proceed nice and slow and easy. And even with that attitude, I was able to get the frequently asked questions part done within one day. And I'm talking about, we gathered up the questions, I asked some, and then some people put some questions in. I took all of those questions, gave them answers, put it into text files, and then wrote the code to put it on the website. And it only took a day, and it was a very easy day. I was impressed that we were getting that much done. So at the Wat, we're taking that different kind of mentality to recognize we can get a whole lot of stuff done, but we can do it happily and easily rather than being under pressure. That the society we live in is a pressurized society. You guys know that. And if you've been to the Wat, you can recognize that that issue of the pressure has been taken off. And the reason that that is there is that pressure is there is due to ignorance. We think that, oh, this has to be done means that we have to do it now. We've got a schedule. We've got a plan. We've got a deadline. And if we don't meet that deadline, we're dead. This is the way that we have to think, and that we got involved with that in school by going from one class to another with a schedule. I remember my first real introduction to IBM Corporation was the fact that they had clocks that would synchronize all over the school, so that one clock would be exactly 12 o'clock, and it would tick over from 1 second before 12 to 12 o'clock, and every clock in the building would do that. And that was high technology in the 1950s. But many of the schools back then would have IBM clocks so that they could precisely time when the bell would ring in the various parts of the school. That's an amazing point. That what I'm getting at is that as kids in the 1950s, we were put on a clock. And I imagine that every school that you've ever been to is on that same clock. And we get on that issue of the clock, that the clock begins to run our lives. And that every time that you look at the clock, this is actually a good practice to get into, is every time that you look at the clock, you can ask, why am I looking at the clock?
Feels good.
Why am I looking at this clock? I'm not saying don't look at a clock. Then in fact, I've got a clock here on the screen. I can see the time, and the cell phone has a clock. But wristwatches have become ubiquitous for a long time. Everybody would wear a wristwatch. But the monks at the Wat, they don't wear wristwatches. They're not concerned with the time. That in fact, about the only one who cares about the time is the one who's going to ring a bell, if they do any bell ringing at all. But it's good to have the bell there, but the Westerners are going to look at it, oh, the bell's going to ring at 4 o'clock. Oh, it's 3 o'clock now, I've got an hour. And then they, oh, it's 3:30, I've got 30 minutes. You know, that kind of mentality. Have you ever had that kind of thought?
I was doing exactly that while I was there.
Instead of just waiting for the bell to ring, and now it's now. Time to go. So we get into that clock habit, and we think that life should be on a schedule. Many examples of that. You're supposed to get 8 hours of sleep. You're supposed to do 3 meals a day. You're supposed to eat breakfast. All of these supposed tos that are built around a clock. To where in the old days, in the time of the Buddha, they didn't have clocks. What they did have was sun. They knew what time to get up because the sun was getting up. But they didn't have sundials. About the closest thing that you could say that they had in the time of the Buddha was to put a stick in the ground and watch its shadow. And when the shadow was the shortest, and who knows when it's short, I guess is when there's no shadow at all, then that would be high noon. But basically, the real point is that it being in the tropics, when does it get hot? So the idea of Weka Labojana, or what time is the right time to eat or when is the right time to gather food, is when it's convenient. And in the afternoon, it's hot, and nobody wants to do much of anything in the afternoon. But that's a natural occurrence. It's not because of the clock saying, "Oh, it's 1 o'clock. It's afternoon now." No, it has to do with how hot it gets, and then at about 4 in the afternoon, the sun is down enough to where it begins to cool off, and then that would be a good time to have the chanting. Or you could wait until in the tropics, sundown is about 6 o'clock every day. Here we're at 10 degrees north latitude in southern Thailand, and the sun invariably goes down for about 20 minutes to 6 until about 20 minutes after 6 all year long. So we're in New Zealand, the clock changes quite a bit according to the season, so that you've got a really long day in the summertime and a very short day in the winter. But in the time and the place of the Buddha, the sun was enough to tell what time it was. And so this is the way that they would live their lives according to the reality. But since about the 15th century, when clocks were invented, we've gotten into this issue of hours. And so how long do they meditate? Well, an hour is an hour. That's a good time limit. And so they started sitting for an hour. I don't know where that situation came from, but I do know that historically they used joss sticks, incense, all right? The joss stick doesn't have to be sweet smelling. It doesn't have to be an incense. But the point about an incense stick being about this long is that it burns for about 20 minutes. And that the reason that they would use incense or joss sticks way back in the time of the Buddha is because bugs, flying bugs, insects, they don't like smoke. And yet you see in our modern times that the insects will crowd around a fluorescent light and die because they like the light. But they do not die in a candle because candles smoke. And they don't want to stay around the smoke. The smoke is dangerous. Smoke means fire to insects. But hot light bulbs, they will die at because it's not built into their gene system. So this is the way that they would time a meditation would be when the mosquitoes come back out. And so everything winds up being quite natural from that. And over the period of the centuries, the watts have not changed so much. Now, all of the Thai people and the Westerners, when they come into the Wat, they're wearing the wristwatches. And the time to change that then is to get into the Wat life, which there's just not much happening, and it's not done according to the bells. It's done, or the clocks. It's done according to the nature of when is the right time to do stuff. And so I would think that, in fact, that was probably the way that it was in Christianity. But Christianity, especially in the monasteries, they bought clocks. And so they, all of the religions of the world now has bought into the clock system so that you go to church at this particular time, etc. There's an old joke about that. And that is that the way that I've heard it most recently is at a Jewish synagogue. The non-Jew came with his Jewish friend, and while it was all happening, he was asking questions about, well, what does this mean, and what does that mean, and when do they open the Torah, and all of this kind of stuff. And then when the sermon started, the Kohen the guy who's giving the sermon, he took his watch off and set it on the pulpit. And then the guy asked, well, why? What does that mean? And the Jew turned to him and says, it doesn't mean nothing. In other words, when the preacher starts to preach, he doesn't think about the time. He just preaches. And so basically, though, they normally hold it to 20 minutes, a 20-minute sermon. They have a service that lasts for an hour, and they'll have about 20 minutes of singing, 20 minutes of getting money from people, and 20-minute sermon. And so that's how they arrange their hour. But at the Wat, during the time of the Buddha, it was always that he would be invited to lunch, and a few monks would go with him. And then after that, they would teach. And how long the Buddha taught, I don't know. But some of those sutras, it takes me a couple of days to read a sutta. And so you'd imagine that the Buddha took his time, was slow, interesting, and people would follow along. But I notice that happens a lot on these calls, that sometimes the calls are going to be very, very long, and many people will then drop out of the call because they've got to watch and they got to go do something. It's time to go here and it's time to go there. So, Corey, when you got into the Wat and you stayed there for a few days, all of that tension and all of that pressure about the clock came off. All of the hurly and burly that you have in the normal life, you let that go because you had a really good environment that could help you do that. And that's very, very hard for Westerners who get interested in Buddhism and they say, oh, I'll go do a retreat and then I'm supposed to meditate every day and all of this kind of stuff. But they wind up getting run by the clock again. And so it's such a good idea then, and I highly recommend it, that Westerners start spending time in the Wats, because there are things that you can learn in the Wat that you just cannot learn on the outside. It doesn't mean that you have to ordain, but if you do, then that education will continue. So that monks only go places when there's something to do, rather than going someplace or doing something because it's time to do it. And then you come back out of the Wat after spending a few days there, and you recognize then what hurly-burly there is in society. All based upon that clock. Oh, I've got to go do this. I've got to go do that. Oh, it's this time. Oh, it's that time. And so it's really a good idea then for Westerners to take off their clocks. Don't wear a wristwatch. And something kind of magical happens in the sense that you kind of understand what time it actually is. Most of us rely upon the clock. Oh, I wouldn't bother to guess what time it is because I can just look at the clock. An example of that is that for quite a number of months, I had a clock alarm set to go off at 7:30 in the morning. And then I turned that on several weeks ago. And guess what? I always wake up within a couple of minutes of 7:30. Mm-hmm. That it becomes natural. We get into the habit of things, and so we don't have to rely upon the clocks anymore. That you kind of get the feeling that this is the right time. And so I would recommend that part of taking out that hurly-burly that you have is to stop wearing a wristwatch. Stop carrying your cell phone around just because it's the most convenient clock that you have. Because I imagine that most people will check what time it is, 100 times a day, 50 times a day?
Probably.
Yeah, instead of No, everything is easy. Everything is good if we take the pressure off, if we take that clock out of our life and just live in the moment. So this is what I would recommend is number one, go to the Wat, stay there for a while, fall into the routine of the Wat, and then when you're coming back out of the Wat, you can see what hurly-burly society is in. But people who are interested in Buddhism, if they don't ever go to the Wat, then they don't have that opportunity to see the contrast. And so I would highly recommend that you continue to go back to the Wat, to go back and stay there, to hang out, to have basically nothing to do and no place to go, and everything becomes really easy. So that the thoughts that we have is about the present moment. Oh, everything is beautiful right now. Isn't this a beautiful Wat to hang out? But then if we get the clock back in the mind, oh, I've got to go. Oh, I've got to go do that. Oh, this needs to be finished. And a lot of the stuff that we want to get done, like Corey, you were talking about buying a house. Don't put pressure on yourself. Oh, I've got to go do this and I've got to go do that. Enjoy what you're doing. If you have to research about additions and things like that, at least enjoy what you're doing. Don't put pressure on yourself that you've got to get it done at a particular point in time. But just enjoy what you're doing in the now. That in fact, if you wait for a while and look at the market and whatnot like that, you can begin to see that real estate markets have ups and downs. Maybe it would be better to wait a year and get a much better deal. But we always have that panic. Oh, housing is going to go up. It's going to get more expensive. It's going to get more expensive. It's going to get more expensive. Oh, I've got to go buy it right now. Do you have that feeling ever? Getting in a hurry? Pardon?
I said all the time.
All the time. Okay. Well, in that case, this is a good talk for you, is to recognize that you can take that pressure off of yourself. That I have dealt with real estate people, and one of the best ones that I know of, he was quite a tycoon. He says that there is, even though it looks like that the market is going up, there's always dips. It goes up and down and up and down and up and down. It's like a sawtooth. That a standard knife blade, like I have here, it's got no serrations on it, which means that it cannot be used as a saw. It's hard to cut with a knife, especially if it's dull. But if you have a saw, those little teeth in there will actually help cut. So recognize that the market goes up and down and up and down, and you can time it right if you're watching. But if you have that feeling of, I've got to get it done, I'm in a hurry, that's where most people get caught up in buying houses. They always, oh, the housing is going up, it's going up, I better buy now, I better buy now. They're the ones who wind up losing money.
Well, the strategy that I'm taking is to buy when the market is a little bit higher, but basically it saves me from having a bid war. So like the house that I'm looking at buying right now, it's listed at 265, and I first offered 225 and then 240, and we'll see if they take 240. They originally had it listed for 285, which was kind of high. So like when the market goes back down, there'll be lots more people because the rates are supposed to go down and the houses might decline a little bit. But basically, you end up getting more people bidding and they end up kind of going higher. So my strategy of going when the market's high is that I pay low, below the market price, and I'll just refinance later on. But basically, that's my strategy. No one else is crazy enough to buy right now, so I could, you kind of have a strategy in the high market to buy at an okay rate. It's difficult and painful, and I wouldn't recommend it. The buying at the low seems to be better off, but there's kind of ways to get it done. You could try to work with the high market. That's what I'm doing.
I understand. And in fact, you're kind of making my point for me. So let me iterate that is that most of those people that you're talking about that you're competing with are in a hurry. They got to get it done. Oh, this is the right time, etc., like that. Rather than being able to buy the house and be comfortable and happy and easygoing about it. Can you do it that way? Can you take the pressure off of yourself about I've got to get it done? I'm in a hurry.
Well, I have done that at many times, and I have kind of used those practices. But at the same time, it's kind of like anytime I feel that way or that rush, I kind of do something with it. So lately, what it feels like is whenever I feel that rush, suddenly I start to slow down, and then I examine like if it's a valid rush or not. And I don't know, like it would be great to not be rushed at all, but I kind of it has a certain kind of meaning or sort of certain kind of instruction that it gives to you. So when you feel the rush, the message is that I need to examine why I'm feeling rushed. Is it a valid rush? Yeah, and then I'll kind of look into it, and if I'm lucky, it'll fade quickly. If I'm unlucky, maybe I'll scramble around for a couple hours or something, but eventually I'll get calm again and have dealt with the issue and, made a decision or something like that.
Well, one of the important points to make on this is that we're not looking to go from one extreme to the other, but rather moving from one extreme into the middle path to avoid the other extreme. Like the other extreme would be so laid back that you never buy a house.
Right.
You never do it. Versus, I got to go do it now, and that extreme. And there's some place in the middle that the Buddha actually, you could say that if there is really a core teaching, it is the middle way, the middle path. That it's good to point out that in the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, which is known to be the very first sutta that he taught, the very first thing that he taught in that very first sutta was about the middle path. He used one example, but the reality is that everything that we do can be done in a middle way, in a middle path to avoid the extremes. And so in the teaching of dukkha, dukkha nirodha, you could see then that the dukkha is always at one extreme or the other. And that the dukkha nirodha is when we find that sweet spot or that balance point. Goldilocks and the Three Bears is a child example of that. That the food's too hot, it's too cold, or it's just right. The bed is too hard, too soft, or just right. And so this is where we're looking for, is to find that balance or that sweet spot so that we always feel good. We're not anxious, we're not uptight, but we can still get stuff done. And we can do it happily, comfortably, and easily. And that's the reason why we should all spend some time in one of these wats or temples to where the monks are practicing that. You could say then that if you took that position of always being laid back, you'd never get anything done. And yet Mahasamsak is obviously a proof that he is he's one of the world-renowned chanters, and he happens to be living in North Carolina. And all the monks know it, but nobody else does. There's all kinds of good things that a monk can do to get done, but he doesn't have to do it under pressure. And so one extreme would be pressurized and getting it done and often making mistakes, having to do it over again. Things fall apart. We don't get what we want and all of that kind of stuff. Versus the other one is that we hang out 100% all the time and never get anything done. But there's this sweet spot in the middle to take the hurly-burly out of the life that you have, Corey, and still have a happy, productive life. It may go at a little slower pace, but you'll get stuff done, and it will probably be done more correctly.
Yeah, that happened. Things that I was contemplating doing before I went into the what, coming out of it, I seemed like a bit more focused to actually get these things done.
Mm-hmm. That we can get that mind focused, and one of the things that helps us get the mind focused is the chanting, but you could do that also in the sense of singing a song. That I use music quite often. There is the suttas are actually, let's see, what, Nacha Gita Watida Visukadasana. No, that's the wrong one. Nacha Gita Watida Visukadasana. Nacha is dance. Gita is singing, but then the Westerners think, oh, thou shalt not ever dance and thou shalt not ever sing. But that's not the rest of the point. Nacha Gita Watida Visukadasana. Now, Visuka, actually that means entertainment, and dasa is to being a slave, the slave to entertainment. Now, in the time of the Buddha, they didn't have tape recorders. They didn't have vinyl discs. They didn't have CDs. They didn't have digital music. All the music and all the dancing had to be done in a live performance. And for that reason, the Buddha says it's not the Nacha and the Gita, it's not the dancing and singing, it's the fact that the monks are in the wrong place when they go for that entertainment. The example that I would use in this would be the Pope. I've seen it, I've got a video of it, that it's an opera. It's got all of the opera. It's got, great big opera hall, and it's got a stage orchestra that's in the orchestra pit. They've got the actors in the suits and all of that on the stage, and all of the audience, in their highfalutin gear. And just before the thing starts, the Pope walks in. Everybody turns around to see him and his entourage, and he comes in and is normally in the balcony or one of these booths, and then he sits down, and then maybe he gives a nod or something, and the orchestra leader is watching, and then the show starts, the opera starts, and no one in the audience is any longer paying attention to the Pope. He's a nothing now. Well, the way that the Buddha operated is that when we are on stage, or when the monks are there, the monks are the center of attention. The sutras also talk about that the Buddha, and this I think is in Sutra number 12, where the Buddha says is that it does not matter what assembly that he goes into, whether it be the state legislature or whatever, he's going to be the star of the show. An example of that would be that Vladimir Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, when he went to the United States, he went to the, I think, the House of Representatives, or maybe it was a joint session, and he gave a talk. He was the center of attention. Would it make any sense for Vladimir Zelensky to come to the House of Representatives and sit in the back? What's the point of that? Okay, so this is where that injunction about the monks, they don't go to places where they're not the star of the show. This is what the Nacha and the Gita are about. And I wanted to make that point so we can come back to say that, in fact, chanting is a Gita. It's a song. Ipitiso Bhagava Araha Samma Sambuddho. It's got rhythm, it's got rhyme, it's got all of that stuff to it. There's also whole books called the Gita and the Gita and Gita, which are the songs of the monks and the songs of the nuns. And so it's wrong to say that the Buddha was against music, because that's not true. That we use it a lot. Another example of that, this blew me away when I found it, that one of the Western monks at Wat Suan Mok convinced Bhikkhu Achan Po to sit down and listen to the fourth movement of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, the Ode to Joy. And Bhikkhu Achan Po's response to that would be, that's wholesome. The Ode to Joy. Joyful, joyful, we adore thee. Dum, 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 dum. Because we Westerners would expect to, oh, that's music. It's not allowed. Don't do it. But that was not Achan Po's response. He could see that that was very healthy. And not only that, but he understood that it took focus in order to do that. And so singing a song that you know is a way of focusing the mind, just like the chanting. And so I would say that going to the Wat and listening to the chanting and being there for it has this outside world of listening to music, but not kind of in the background. We're not talking about elevator music where it's just a noise that nobody's paying attention to, but rather that you're actually focused on it. And this is actually a good way of focusing the mind. For that reason, I think that it's really good for musicians. I've got a few professions. I think that engineers are really good with the Dhamma. Martial artists are good with the Dhamma. Musicians are good with the Dhamma because all of them have a way of they bring their mental focus with them that they have learned in the ordinary world, and they can put that to work in their Dhamma practice, is to be able to focus the mind. And if we can focus the mind, say, on coding, and we're focusing with that in the sense of enjoying, oh, I enjoy writing this code, and I can do it very carefully, in the sense of knowing exactly where to put the semicolons and exactly which kind of quotes to use and where the angle brackets go and all of that. We can pay close attention to that. But a programmer who is in a hurry gets sloppy, and then he's got errors in his code that he has to take a lot of time to go chase down because he wasn't careful when he was putting it in, because he wasn't focused on what he was doing. He was in a hurry. Okay? So this is the whole quality that you can get by going to the Wat, is to slow down, get your mind focused, and then when we go back into the ordinary world, we can get things done easily, happily, beautifully, and sometimes even faster.
I happened to notice, Dhammarato, because I initially went in thinking I was like, I wasn't interested in the chanting, but actually I began to actually really enjoy it.
Yes, it's actually quite enjoyable. I went with at Wat Greensboro, North Carolina, with Mahasamsak. My feeling was that I didn't like it, even though I had had a lot of music. But I did fall into it. I did begin to enjoy it. In fact, I liked it very much. That the monks do a whole lot of chanting during the Panza period, about 3 months. And that's where I learned so much. I actually make a joke about it in the sense that I've actually written a Pali chanting book. It's on our website. And that the joke that I make about it is that I had to write that chanting book in self-defense because Mahasamsak was such an expert at it, and I couldn't follow hardly anything. And so I had to actually write a book to get the text so that I could follow along and enjoy it more because I knew what he was doing now rather than just blindly listening. See, if we did the same chant over and over and over and over and over again every day, then people can fall into it. There's a standard chant in the morning and a standard chant in the evening. But during Panza, he would bring out all kinds of stuff that he had memorized. And so I needed the text to go along with that, and that it's actually quite useful and beneficial, and so that we can actually learn to enjoy it. Just like people will go to an opera and listen to it in a foreign language. Or the Ode to Joy is actually in German. And we can still get a great deal of enjoyment out of it, even though it's in a foreign language, but it's even more good if we better if we actually understand what they're saying. And so let's finish this off with the point that learning to slow down and finding that middle way is of great advantage. And yet our society is way off over into the extreme of over in a hurry, we got to get it done, we've got deadlines and all of that kind of stuff. And when you go to the Wat, you recognize that, no, there's a better way. There's a middle path there. It makes it really, really easy. So, do you guys have any final questions or whatnot?
No. That's just what you've said. Just keep going. And I'm visiting another Wat in New Zealand next month, so I'll get to do it again.
Great. What I would ask for is for you to get kind of detailed information, write a description of how the Wat is, what you felt like there, the address, if they've got a website, if they've got an email address, all of that kind of stuff, so that we can put it in our database.
Okay.
And having 2 Wats in New Zealand. How many Wats are there in New Zealand? Probably
less than 10, really.
I'm impressed. 10 Wats. And the reason that I'm impressed is because New Zealand was not in the war. It wasn't in the Vietnamese War. And that's why there's so many Wats in the United States. Something like about 500 Wats in the United States.
Wow.
And they all are related somehow to the Vietnamese War, either because of refugees or because the Thai girls latched on and married one of the military people and then went back to the U.S. That's one of the funny things is that almost all, not almost all, but quite a number of Wats, Thai Wats, are located around military bases. An example of that is Fayetteville, North Carolina has 5 Thai Wats. Why? Fayetteville, North Carolina. Fayetteville is a tiny little town compared to Raleigh and Charlotte. The answer to that is Fort Bragg, one of the biggest military installations is in Fort Bragg. Another one is Sumter, South Carolina, has Shaw Air Force Base. But it's 70 miles from the capital, and there's more Wats in Sumter, South Carolina than there is in Columbia, South Carolina. Why is that? Because of Shaw Air Force Base. So, having 10 Wats in New Zealand, I'm impressed. That means a lot of Thai people decided to immigrate to New Zealand.
Yeah, it's increasing.
So, Corey in Washington, do you have any final words to say? He's probably gone off someplace. All right. Well, we'll see you guys later. Thanks a lot, Corey. I'm really pleased that you've come back.
Thank you. I'll talk again soon.
Excellent.
Right.
We'll see you.
See ya.
Have a good one, guys. Peace.
Oh, go ahead. I'm here. Yes, Corey.
Oh no, I was just saying goodbye. I quite tired. Late evening, so I was like kind of relaxing with my eyes closed for a bit, just listening. But it was a good talk. Lots of things. I'm excited to go to the other Wat now that I got those directions. It's a couple hours north in Seattle, so I'll go sometime probably in the next month or two and give it a try. So that'll be exciting, fun. Yeah, for sure.
Excellent. Be sure to get a couple of Bhikkhu Buddhadasa books, because Ajahn Reach's very famous for giving books out. He's got quite a library.
Cool. Yeah, I'll definitely do that. All right, have a good one.
All right, Corey. See you later.
See you next time.